Hey everyone, welcome. Thank you so much for being here. We may have more people rolling in, but welcome everyone to Karen Publishing, Resilience in the Face of Rejection here at LitArts RI. I'm Jody Vincent, I'm the program director here, and we're a nonprofit serving writers, illustrators, and protesters with community events and workspace. I'm so happy to be into it. Our program coordinator, Susanna Morris, is here as well. She's working back there on the recording. So we are recording today's event for those who couldn't be here. So just want to give you that awareness and Q&A that we are recording. And remind you to bring up photos for social media. So just let me know after you finish. Before we get started, I wanted to mention that it is our organization's 5-year anniversary. So I'm not a great salesperson, but this is the last weekend to pre-order this limited edition. Oh yes, the anniversary tote bag. So feel free to take a closer look. We just kind of mocked that up, but it's the original sketch of part of this Providence mural that you see behind our lovely panelists by Providence illustrator Kelly Murphy. So proceeds go to So we want to acknowledge today that LitArts RI is headquartered here in the city of Providence on the ancestral homelands of the Narragansett Nation, who had their land stolen through settler colonial violence and who continue to be kept from that land through systemic oppression, impoverishment, and invisibility. We recognize their continued presence as a sovereign nation and millennia-long steward of this land, its waters, and all living things, as well as the historical tribal presence of the Nipmuc, Wampanoag, and Neanderthal. We honor their stories and the vibrant contributions of Indigenous people from many nations who live, work, and create in Rhode Island today. So this event was made possible, and it's free because of a project grant from the Providence Arts, Culture, and Tourism Council and a grant from the Dexter donation, which we're very grateful. And it's part of a program series on cultivating care and creative practice. We'll have more programming on this theme, including a resource fair, an arts and health showcase, and workshops, writing workshops coming up in 2024. So be sure to follow us on social at LitArts RI and sign up for our newsletters to stay informed. So today we're celebrating the end of National Novel Writing Month. So did anyone here participate? Yeah. Yeah, awesome. Congratulations. Cheers to all of you who participated in any way. That's such a Our conversation will likely have relevance for you and also anyone stepping into the publishing world or who has just been working to publish over time. Maybe you've had some successes, maybe you just started, maybe you're feeling crushed and rejected right now because that happens. That is okay. And welcome. We're just getting started. Come on in. We're here to acknowledge the difficult world of book publishing. Just name some of those barriers that come with it and share with each other ways through it so that we can all cultivate some resilience when it comes to what can often feel like inevitable rejections on the path to publication. It can help to name it and be together. And so we have with us today some expert guides. All 3 of our panelists are debut authors of books that came out this year. I'm going to read their bios and just by way of introduction, and then they'll each be sharing about their road to publication and some strategies for dealing with the difficulties that come with it. After they each share a little, they'll be in conversation with each other, and then we will open it up to your questions as well. So starting with Rebekah here on the far left, Rebekah Bergman's debut novel, The Museum of Human History, published by Tin House in 2023, was named one of Wired Magazine's best books of summer and received star reviews from Kirkus, Booklist, and Shelf Awareness. Her writing appears in Joyland, LitHub, Electric Literature, and other journals. And she lives here. Samih-Rotondo is a multi-genre Palestinian American educator and mother. A graduate of Rhode Island College, she earned degrees in English and education and an MFA in writing from Lesley University. When she is not befriending trees or attuning to hidden stories, she is leading transformational educational experiences and addressing the social, emotional needs of historically underserved and multilingual youth. Her writing has appeared in Masters Review, Gulfstream Literary Magazine, and Squawk Journal. She lives in Providence with her husband and 3 children. All Water Has Perfect Memory is her first book. And Candace Williams is a poet and interdisciplinary artist. I Am the Most Dangerous Thing, out this year from Alice James Books, is their debut full-length poetry collection. Candace earned her Bachelor of Arts in Philosophy, Politics, and Economics from Claremont McKenna College and Master of Arts in Education from Stanford University. They grew up in the Pacific Northwest and found love and poetry in Brooklyn, New York. Now Candace lives and makes art in New England. Welcome to our panelists, and thank you all for being here. I'm Rebekah. This is my book. I'm going to read off some notes that I took, but also make this a little bit more casual than that, just to talk a little bit about the road that this book took to see it today. I spent 8 years working on it, and it came out in August. So this is all pretty fresh still to me. Before I wrote this novel, I had never tried to write a novel before. Well, let me back up and just say, like, the 2 themes I think of what I'm about to talk about. One is I was told no, or like went down each and every moment of the journey before like being told yes for finding the right path. A pretty long way before like hitting that intersect. And then the other theme is just so much waiting, and I wonder if you all found that in your journeys too. That like I would do as much as I could and then have to wait. And I found the waiting almost more unbearable. But yeah, so before writing this, I only wrote short stories. Only ever cared about short stories. Often tried to write them short as kind of fun and valuable and how small story and still have everything that I was really interested in prose poetry and that kind of line and I was in an MFA program where it just felt like every other person was like, so I sort of like no, I don't care about novels, I'm a short story writer. Then I graduated from that program and found a job outside of the publishing world. Didn't have like the deadlines of workshop anymore, didn't have a cohort of other students, didn't have mentors, professor, and needed to like refine my identity as a writer. And at that same time, I also which was super surprising to me. I didn't really know how to go about writing one, and I thought, and this was like the wrong term, I thought if I just sat at my desk every day and wrote 1,000 words, it would just kind of happen. And at that point, all I really had was like this even an idea, which was this memory of my childhood. This girl who lived a few blocks away from me, who had this horrible accident when she was a toddler and was in a coma, and she was said to be before the miracles from this coma. There's a really weird thing. 60 Minutes came to town and did like a special on her, and I was 8 years old at the time and didn't really know what was happening. And flash forward to post MFA years, sitting at my desk. What was that all about? I think I'm going to write about this. Went down that road for a long time, sat in front of my desk, wrote my 1,000 words a day, and then picked my head up one day. I didn't have any direction. It was just not going anywhere. I think some of that was self-doubt, but actually, like, truly, it just didn't have energy. And it also wasn't my story to tell. I started to feel really weird about like what had already happened to this girl and her life and her body. Yeah. When I tell the story, I don't even know this story. So I was like, forget it. I am a short story writer. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to go back to short stories. I wrote a short story, which is nothing to do about man, this woman, in a world where there's a new technology that can stop the body. She wants to have it. So it's a lot about aging, memory, relationships, time. I really liked that short story, and I was like, great. I'm I'm back to short stories, but there was something in that story that I just kind of wanted to keep unpacking. So I started writing short stories, and then kept kind of pulling out characters from that original story and telling their stories, and then circled back to this girl in this world who was in a strange coma, and then realized I was actually writing a novel. So I think the way I ended up doing it was I had to trick myself into doing it. I couldn't set out with expectations in mind. And so Jody asked us to think about like resources that we found helpful. I didn't read this book at the time, but I read it later. It's really great. It talks about how the work needs to be smarter than you are. And I think that this was a case of like, I didn't really know what I was doing while I was doing it, but like suddenly it kind of emerged. No, these aren't short stories. No, these aren't stories. This is actually a novel. So yeah, I spent 4 years writing it that way, and then I said I was not the first time I wasn't done. I wasn't done. My editing was we kind of tried to make the whole bigger than the sum of its parts. In 2020, I said I was done again, and I thought when the pandemic hit, early 2020, we were all going to be home for a couple weeks. I thought that I would use that time to start hiring agents and come up with a short list and maybe the time what that process was like the first time I did it. But queried a couple of agents, got a lot of waited, then got a lot of really nice no's, but all no's. And so it was like, okay, guess I wasn't done after all. I did get really good feedback on how to revise it. So went back again, revised it again. And then I got one yes. And something interesting is once you have one yes, suddenly there's leverage and like the scale really tips. And so I could get back in touch with all the other agents who I was just waiting around for on the bottom of their pile, and suddenly they had a reason to read it, and it was top of the list because it's like catnip when you say somebody wants this. Could you let me know? So that second time, 2 agent offers, which was really a surprise and a good place to. The decision then, one agent said, "This is ready to go. I want to submit this." And the other one said, "I really like this and I want to represent it, but I." And it was really sad to agree with her. But I did agree with her, and I knew at that point, like I said, I'd never done this before. I knew that I needed other people's vision to make it as good as it could be. So yeah, I can flash forward a bit, but I spent another year and a half, almost 2 years, revising the novel with that agent. And the process of that took was a lot of. I spent a lot of time working on the revision, sent it to her, and she took even more time. And get back to me. So again, a lot of waiting. Eventually in 2021, she was like, "I think it's ready. Let's send it out to some publishers." We had a small list of publishers. We sent it out. We waited a long time. Again, all nice no's. We got some good feedback and revised it again. And actually, I missed a key part, which was that one editor at a totally dream publisher really wanted it. And she and I had a great phone call, and she made it seem like yes, definitely. And then I was on board with all the edits she wanted, but her acquisition board actually wouldn't let her that. So that was like truly devastating. That reduction was probably the hardest I faced. Oh, now we're finally at the end of the road. Like, this is it. It's got to be a book. Sorry, I couldn't convince the acquisition board to buy it. But at least I got her editorial vision and revised it one more time. At this point, 7 years down the line, a lot has changed in my life. Since I started the book, I was pregnant and about to have my first baby, and was writing other things, which I was excited about. And I told my agent, "Let's revise it one more time. Let's submit it one more time. And after that, if it doesn't sell, I'm ready to move on." And I really meant it. I was excited about writing still, but this book I felt like it had taken a long time, done a lot with it, and if it wasn't ever going to be a book, I decided to put it on. And I don't know if maybe you have to like reach that point.
at that point, she did submit it again. And I told her to go wider. It doesn't need to be, I just want to see this. She submitted to smaller presses and we got an offer from Tin House after waiting a little bit. And then we're able again to be like, hey, other editors, first, are the books on the bottom of the pile? Do you want it too? If somebody else wants it. And I ended up again with 2 offers. One with Tin House, it seemed like the vision that my editor had for the book was the vision that I had for the book too. But yeah, so 7 years later, finally sold it. And at which point I was actually working with an editor who wanted to edit the book. So we spent another year editing, and it came out in August. And I'm just gonna look to see what I forgot to mention, but that's the basic story of it. Yeah, I'm thrilled that it did see the light of day and I didn't end up deciding we're going to put on the shelf and work on other things. I will say that by the last time I read through it, I was so sick and tired of reading. It had been a lot of working through and editing. There came a day when my editor said, we're going to send it to the printer next week. Do you want to read through it one more time? And I said, no.
So my book's journey, some similarities, but a lot of differences as well. So for one thing, I did my MFA, I graduated in 2012 from Leslie's program, and I intentionally chose this program because at that point I had a 1-year-old and it's a low residency program. So I was like, okay, if I need to know how to write with a kid, low residency is the way to do it because it's very much like setting your own pace and just kind of learning to be accountable to yourself. However, I started off in the fiction program, which like was very worthwhile, learned a lot. But that program, what it taught me, it was like more important the community I was creating and the folks that I was getting to know versus the actual like skill sets, because it's like these, like the information and the skill sets, anybody with like internet and like access to like a public library, honestly, if you wanted to, like you can get these skill sets. Like we live in that time now, right? Where you can like do a TED talk or whatever to like pick up those skills and just practice and like develop a writing community, come to a place like this. And like, so it helped me in that it helped me kind of have an audience of a community of people I graduated with from various genres, which was super important because I graduated with fiction with this collection of short stories that I maybe ended up liking one of like the however many things I made. And I was like, yeah, short stories are cool, but like, I don't just want to do this. And that took time for me to like recognize stories that really wanted to come out were actually memories and experiences from my life. So I contacted all my friends who did the nonfiction program and I'm like, please send me a reading list. Please look this over. And it was like years of that. And I was like, okay, well, what makes this memoir different from that? Because I was totally immersed in a completely different genre for 2 years. So thankfully I had that community and they like supported me and like led me in the right direction. I like immersed myself in the situation. And there were some chapters or some pieces of chapters in my book that literally I started like 10 years ago, like fresh out of the MFA program. And it's like what I kept getting stuck on is because like I know what the story is, I lived it, right? But it's like that wasn't where like what I wanted to like say. I want to have sort of a toolbox of storytelling techniques and be really intentional and like why I'm choosing this technique and for what reason. So like it really started to be more about the craft and like the whole publishing world. There was like this controversy, and I'm sure it's still there in this MFA program where like the program is so intentional on just like craft and workshop and like they intentionally don't like want to spend energy or effort to like tell you anything about the business side. And it was this like small group of us that were like super vocal about being like, this is BS. Like, you need to tell us like the information about the business side. Like, why are you gatekeeping this information? So me and this little rebellious group, we like set out to like get that info on our own. And one person in particular from this group ended up sort of, yes, she's an amazing poet, she's an amazing educator, but she was also an editor and then became a book acquisition editor for the small feminist press that ended up picking up my book. And we had stayed in contact through the years. And she, so one of the chapters that were in there, I had just submit because I was already in the practice of submitting to small literary magazines, and that was more just for me to like feel like I had my foot in it somehow, right? Like I was getting the feedback, I was getting the structure of like meeting deadlines. It just like felt good to like participate, even though I didn't have it in the back of my mind quite yet that I was like ready for like a big thing. So that one piece ended up in Gulfstream magazine. My friend who stayed in touch with now had just started a new position with a small press. Was like, so are you working on a book? Because if so, I'd like to acquire it. And I'm like, well, if it's you, I guess I'm working on a book now, right? Because it was just happened like organically, again, from this community. So I was like, okay. And then simultaneously, the pandemic happened, which was huge. So I'm a mom of 3, and I was at that time a full-time teacher. My time to write was literally limited to little moments here and there, but like, if I took like a community writing workshop or something, it was like limited to that space. It wasn't ingrained in my day-to-day the way that it needed to be. Pandemic happened, and yes, I'm on Zoom school, but I also am like not in traffic. I'm also not like, delivering kids to here and there. So I was like, had this time. And simultaneously, April of 2020, my grandmother, who's like a huge, obviously, like part of the book, because this is about my matrilineal line, she passed away, and she was like in her 90s. It was definitely her time. But she lived in Atlanta, which was like devastating because in Islam, we have to bury within 24 hours. And like, even if we weren't on lockdown, it would have been very impossible to like figure that out that fast and like go mourn her formally. So I like had to grieve and mourn her on my own. So what that meant for me is like digging all these things out of my closet, these pictures and these journals, and like really taking the time. And what emerged from that is like I'm getting all these memories again, and I'm like journaling like crazy, really just for me. And then coming back like weeks later and looking at them and being like, that's a story, that's a chapter, that, like kind of re-seeing it because I literally finally had the time to like sit and process. So I had the practice already of like keeping a blog, and then and things I started to kind of work on for that, I was like, oh, this is actually longer than a blog post. This is right. So this is actually like not what I think. All right, let me save that. Let me like work on this for. So yeah, literally it was like a 2-3 month kind of time span. All these things were happening at the same time. And my friend Lisa reached out. So it was like maybe a year and a half after that, I gave her the first draft, and she was like one of my first readers. And then she suggested, so I knew nothing of the business part. Like you need first readers and you need all this. I had no idea. So I just like learned that as I went. And so in having to really get over a huge hurdle for me was like imposter syndrome and just like not having the self-confidence. And I mean, that has to do with being like a woman writer, but also being Palestinian. Like I was definitely like so many of the comments on my short stories in my MFA program was sort of like bordering on censorship in a way, because like you don't want to make your readership uncomfortable. You don't want to blacklist yourself and place it. And I was always like, whatever, I'm just going to be who I am. People like it or they don't. I don't really care. Like I can't live like that. I'm like literally the only Palestinian in most spaces that I'm in Rhode Island. Like I'm not gonna like censor. So I just kind of like put it to the side, but it still gnawed at me when it came time to think about, like an actual book being out. So now when I had to like face that, it was like not even coming from the outside world anymore. It was just coming from in here. And I like had to battle that, had to deal with that. So like my self-care practices were really important. I was in therapy the whole time I was writing. It was obviously like loads of fun childhood and intergenerational trauma in there, but like in a fun way. Make it fun. But yeah, I just like, that was the journey more so than the waiting was huge, but like the battle within myself was like bigger. So once it finally got to that point where my book acquisition editor friend was like, "We need a group of first readers," my initial reaction was like panic, because I'm like, do I even know that many people who want to like take the time to read my work? And then I like step back from that panic and I'm like, okay, I think I do. Let me just like get out of my own headspace. And I did. I made this list and I was like, if they say no, it's okay. Like, don't freak out. And like people surprisingly said yes and were like super supportive. And I got like amazing feedback and like revised based on that. Gave it another go back and forth. It was like a good like 2-3 years of that. And yeah, just like made it as good as it could be. So yeah, it was not like a traditional, like I didn't like query, right, with a group. I don't think I would have been mentally ready for any of that. But now that I know the process, it's gonna make the next book like that much easier.
Thank you guys so much for sharing this stories. I had to take notes because I actually had to think back this morning, like, what year is it right now? I've just been informed it's 2023, so. Okay, so I think my story starts in 2015. I was a Brooklynite. I had spent some time teaching, but I actually just had transitioned into tech. And so this was the first time. I mean, I was definitely still paycheck to paycheck because in Brooklyn, you can literally be like a millionaire and still sometimes be paycheck to paycheck. So I was still kind of struggling, but I felt comfortable enough to kind of have a good place to live. It was a good partnership. And then actually my partner was like, I'm gonna go to Mexico for a summer. And I think that you should try to do some creative stuff while I'm gone. I'm gonna be doing some printmaking. It's weird, you don't do anything creative, you're just all about work. So I was like, all right, fine. And I don't even know why, but I just Googled like Brooklyn Poetry Workshop and I came across Brooklyn Poets and I was like, oh, Wendy Xu is teaching a workshop the week that she leaves. I'm gonna sign up. And that honestly just got me started to write because I think before then I couldn't even think about writing because I had to be very practical. Like, how am I going to afford to live in New York? How am I going to like survive living there? Like, how am I going to pay off my student loans? Like, all these things made it impossible for me to think like a creative. So I was really thankful to just be in a place where I could be open to that. So I took the workshop. It was about 5 weeks, and Brooklyn Poets and Wendy Xu just really took me under their wing. It's very similar to LitArts RI. It's just in Brooklyn. And I just started taking workshops like back to back. I was taking 2 at a time. I also took some at cultivating. And then through these organizations, I just started to meet people and they would invite me to readings and I would meet more people. So I think I just started to build community through the nonprofits and the spaces that I was in. And that was incredibly important to me. Like, honestly, like, Wendy was like, oh, why don't you submit these poems? And I did, and they all got published within like 3 or 4 months. And then I just posted one to Facebook at the time, and I was like, 5 people are going to like this, like my mom and my sister and whatever. And I got like 200 likes, and like my high school English teacher was like crying to me on the phone. And I knew you had this, and he was like, what are you talking about? Like, whatever. Okay, so then I was just like, well, this is fun. This is cool. Let me just keep writing. And poetry, it's funny when you said I like to write short stories because I don't like writing long things. I probably did poetry because you could write a single line and call it a poem. Like, that's really why I started in that genre. And so it's cool. It's also cool because you can experiment on a very small unit. So I could write a 3-line poem and that's an experiment. I could write a longer poem. I could erase something. And it was just such a cool time and space to be in New York with some really cool, thoughtful people writing about things that we all cared about. And I would just take, honestly, like Jason Koo, who's the director of Brooklyn Poets, I would go to his apartment and take his Cave Canem class. I would see him at Cave Canem the same week for something else. I would see him at his apartment for a third thing. And I was seeing him more than my actual partner, just trying to learn a lot about poetry. And then it kind of got to a point where I realized, oh, like maybe I have enough for a chapbook. And I talked to Jason, who just encouraged me to submit that. So in 2018, my chapbook Spells for Black Wizards came out in a very small press called the Atlas Review. It actually was like a blend between an artist's book and a poetry book. It was like a map that folded out. We printed about 200 copies and they sold out in like 10 minutes. And then they came out with a second and third edition that were more of a traditional book, but still kind of fancy. And that was a really cool moment for me. Like we got to go to the Ace Hotel and launch it, and it was just super exciting. And then honestly, 2018, I also submitted, or like I had submitted, talk about waiting. So I was just like, actually, I've written some more work. I'm going to submit to like the National Poetry Series. I learned in 2018 that I was a finalist that year, which was kind of a big like kick for me, like, oh wow, this is super cool. What do I do with this? And then I also had to make a choice. So when I started to write poetry, I was at a tech startup. I felt like that journey was coming to an end because it was about to be acquired by a company that would either fire me or like give me a really terrible time at work. So my boss encouraged me to maybe try something else. He was like, I think you to another startup, but I didn't know what to do. So I applied to one MFA program at NYU and I got in. And then I realized something. I was like, I still have a ton of debt for my master's degree that was still going to take me like 10 more years to pay off. And I was just doing the math. I was like, how does this debt even work? Like, this is going to multiply. Like, am I going to have like 6 figures of debt? Like, I couldn't even like as a trained economist, I was just like, this is not going to work. And the weird thing that happened is that the week I got accepted into NYU, I got an invite to do a reading with the person who directs that program, Deborah Landau. And I was like, okay, so I'm being invited to read at the same events. I have this community in Brooklyn Poets. So what I decided to do was just continue to teach and read in that community. And I went back actually and became a humanities teacher again. And that was actually great because I loved teaching, writing. I would write a lot in the summer or like late at night. And then, of course, COVID happened. And so after the National Poetry Series, poetry is very weird. Like, I don't even know how it compares, honestly. It's just like its own thing. Agents for poetry is a whole new thing. So I was just submitting the work. And you go to a lot of websites of top publishers, and the first thing they'll say is, like, do not send your work. And I was like, so in poetry, you don't have an agent and you publish poetry and I have poems, like, how does this actually get done? So I just started cold emailing like any person. Like, I was like, who are my favorite 10 presses, like top ones and then small ones? And honestly, a lot of them wrote back and they're like, we would love to read this. And so then I had a lot of top presses just reading the book off of a cold email. As you can imagine, it was probably at the bottom of their pile. The waiting game on that was like sometimes over a year with like no sort of like, hey, we're still reading. And then, of course, they all said no, but they were all very encouraging no's. And the weird, annoying thing that happened is that I realized that there were some maybes, but I did not like the terms of their maybes. So for me, it's like, I'm a Black queer writer, and I would research these presses and I would see who was being the reader. And it's like, nobody who reads this book looks like me and like has had my experience. And actually, this book is not for them. Like, I didn't set out to write a book for their reading experience. Like, my book is actually for me. So like, I don't know how I feel about a world where I'm being told by this group of people that my book needs this and that, when I've looked at poetry can also be anything. So I've seen books published that are like a single word, right? And then you realize that there's a lot of privilege in there, like who's allowed to actually be experimental and all that. And so then I kind of had to take a step back and I kind of put it into the Disney vault. And COVID happened, and I was teaching from home. I was a full-time teacher in this tiny, like, I would wake up in bed, I'd be in bed, and I would go to my desk, and I would teach at my desk, and I would go right in bed and also teach poetry to adults from bed. It was a wild time. One cool thing that happened is that the first or second month of the pandemic, I did a book-length erasure of The Heart of Darkness, which is in that book on Black paper. And I felt like that was kind of like the last piece that I needed to feel better about the book. But the funny thing is that I put it back in the vault. Like, I kind of liked that poem, and I only really had my dog and my partner to read it at that time, and they kind of liked it. But I was just like, I've been said no to a lot, and I kind of feel like I'd rather not publish this book than to compromise on things that are important. So I'm just gonna pause for a while. So I kind of spent a lot of time just teaching through Brooklyn Poets and a few other places before the pandemic. Like it was cool because I could like fly out and talks and stuff like that, and just kind of trying to survive the pandemic, honestly. So I moved here. I started to teach at Wheeler, and then actually my book got accepted by a press, like let's say in end of 2020. And at first I was like, oh, great, like the story is over, the cold email worked. But then I kind of realized this press is a little too small. This book is a little too technical for them because this book has erasure poems from the New York Times. Anybody who makes books knows those are very hard to print. It has all of these features that you can't just print in a traditional way. And I felt like this press didn't have enough money to really do justice to that. And also, the press was so small that whenever bad things would happen, it would like derail the whole process. So I met Kava Akbar at AWP right before COVID in Portland. And he's a very great writer who's just very kind and sweet person. And he was like, if you ever need my help getting your work out there, please call me. And I'm kind of like the kind of person like, no, I want to do it by myself. This is my process. My book is good enough. Like, how dare you offer to help me? Like, I didn't say that to him, but that's kind of what I was thinking. And it's funny because my partner, like, every year would be like, can you just text Kava? Like, can you call Kava? So finally I texted him. He read the book and he just said incredible things to me. He was just like, this book is awesome. Like, he was just like, you just need help navigating this very opaque world that is designed to honestly keep you out. So it's not you, like, it's the world. And he was like, you could get an agent, I could introduce you to people. And I kind of didn't want to do that. I don't even know why. I kind of felt like I wanted to almost just be done with this whole thing. But then he did say, I actually got he got his first book published at Alice James. And so he knew them and he actually introduced me to Carrie Salerno, who's the executive director. And she decided to read my book. And the funny thing is that even with that warm connection, it took forever. Like months and months were passing. And I actually got a yes from a smaller press in like 2021, actually around this time. And then I emailed Karen, was like, well, somebody else said yes. So I'm going to need a decision from you. And she emailed me the same night, this beautiful note. Like, it was honestly this gorgeous 10 paragraph, just like, this is what we love about your book. We're so excited to have this. This is going to be your book. Anything you want with it. And I was like, boom, I'm sold. So I signed, and the funny thing is like I signed the contract in 2021 for a published date in 2023, which is also, people don't like, you've been talking about how long it takes. It's like, even though it was a poetry book, it's like, you're not even on the calendar for another 2 years after that. And then during that time, I had a call with Carrie again, and she was just like, she was like, you can even push your date out further if you want. Like, you should just take time to make this book exactly what you want. You should know that this is your book, and we chose this book, and we like believe in this book. And also, we would like to print the Dark Diary on black paper. And I was like, that's awesome. Just please do that. And so honestly, I added, I didn't make that many changes because I felt like I'd been sitting with it for so long. I did make a few changes. She had like 2 suggestions. The coolest part of the editing process was actually the copy editing with Julie Bausma, who's the poet laureate of Maine. She read my book like honestly 5 or 6 times, and we sat on the phone for about 6 hours, and we went line by line, and she actually fact checked me, which is important because my book has a lot of historical content. So like even just making sure that my dates lined up, making sure that I was referencing my sources correctly. Like, did you mean to, because in poetry I had to make a lot of choices about even like capitalization of the word black, like what is black capitalized or not. So like, oh, like that's your pattern. Did you mean to break the pattern here? Yes or no? And that was a really cool experience where I was like, this is the right press for me. And then, yeah, it came out in May of this year. I was kind of busy with work, and like during this time, I'd also transitioned back from teaching back into tech. So I was able to just kind of go to New York and do some readings here. And I think that if I had to boil down the 3 questions that helped me in this process, it was, the first question is, why do I write? Like, period. And I think everyone's gonna have a different answer, and it's really multiple answers. And honestly, there's the answer you tell the magazines and the answer that you know for yourself. And honestly, sometimes I was like, it's exciting to write, you know, it gets you attention. Sometimes you get to go to cool parties you would not be invited to. I was in my late 20s, so this is like my late 20s answer. Now I kind of realize I write really because it really helps me think. Like my poems are really this artifact of this new thought process that I've had, and they really help me process the world and think. And in New York, it's a really important thing doing that. You're around all this stuff, and like you're in reality, and it connects to history. And if you don't stop and ask like big questions, you just are kind of like floating in it. So that was one. So I realized like my poems are an artifact of a thought process or a feeling. And then specifically, I write poetry because poetic forms, they really, through their constraint, they produce whole new feelings and thoughts, right? So like in my book, you'll notice there are a lot of forms. I write in blank verse, I write sestinas, erasures, gazelles, all types of stuff. And there's like every single form lends itself to a different type of rumination or thought. So for me, it's like I'm writing to really think and to have new thoughts and to have new feelings, which is super important here. And then the next question is, well, then if my poem is just an artifact and I'm writing for me, why share it at all, right? And I kind of had this thought experiment. I think early on, it's like attention is nice, especially when Twitter was actually fun, and Facebook was a bit more fun. It's like people like your mom's best friend would email you and be like, "Oh, I read your poem," and also like money. Like I did get commissions, I was able to travel. Now I've realized actually the reason why I share my work, one, is to build community and to find people. Like even if they don't think the same thoughts, we have the same concerns as artists or even the content. And then also I really think that it's important to just be in the archive, like to be in the like to have my work in the stream of thought, not because it's super important or more important, but I think that a lot of people just who are like me have not been able to have their thoughts placed in the archive. So for example, for the longest time, if you ask me like who invented rock and roll, like I'd be like honestly like, oh, this white group or whatever. And then I was watching a video of Sister Rosetta Tharpe, and I was like, if we didn't have this video of like her and Chuck Berry, I don't think I would know who invented rock and roll, and I think that's wild. And so I want to be a part of the archive, and I want to help just make sure that it's not just me who's there. So whenever I can, it's like, who can I help get placed there? Because it's super important. Like being in a library is super huge. Like the fact that people at Brown or the New York Public Library or at SEF can check out my work for now and in years to come is super important to me. And I think this also ties into why I decided I didn't need to get the MFA personally, is because I had this community that I was building at Brooklyn Poets, and I was in New York, and I think it's just a bit easier there to do that. And also I didn't really have a lot of money, and I realized that if I got into a situation where I didn't have enough money, my poetry would have to make me money, and I realized that that was already starting to get dangerous. So I have the privilege now of just like writing, and honestly, writing probably loses me money, and that's a privilege. So it's like if there's an opportunity that I don't want, I can say no. If someone has something to say about my work, like I actually don't have to care. I've written things that definitely people want to be censored, and I can just be like, well, you're not paying me money. Like I really care about your thoughts. And it's cool to kind of have a separation between my work life and my art life, and not have to be like, well, is this gonna get me a teaching job, or is this gonna get me a grant, or will I win that award? Like it's fun to get all of that stuff. Awards are always appreciated. If you have any to give to me, that'd be great. But it's just kind of like, it was cool to realize I don't have to do that for money. And I think that that's a big privilege, and I think it's totally changed a lot of my work. And then the third question is like, what makes I Am the Most Dangerous Thing a book, and what makes that book mine? And I feel like saying no thank you to these presses who I won't name, because that's a bit much, but it's like me being like, actually, I'm gonna think back to Audre Lorde and Sarah Schulman, who talks a lot about the gentrification of the mind and of publishing, and like James Baldwin has an incredible talk about artistic integrity, and I had to just be like, I love edits and I love to revise. That's actually my favorite part of the process. I love sharing my work. But what's the power dynamic of that process? And like, how come I have friends who are able to just publish whatever, and like I have to go through this intense process, and like, how does that sit with me? And so I just said to myself, you know, I want to find a press who's all in, and then they have access to that process with me. And I'm going to say no to people who I feel like honestly don't really represent me at all. Like I'm not reflected in their board, in their readership, in the people reading the books. And I think that that really helped this book stay mine. Like, and yeah, I would say this book is hard to read, and I think it's okay because, yeah, it's okay. Anyways, that's all I have to say. That's all my notes. Thank you.
Okay, I just want us to have one more time for these authors. Talk about rejection. I keep hearing about that long process, the waits, the barriers, like makes the triumphs like all the more sweeter, and I think it's really important to acknowledge and celebrate they do happen. So congrats to all of you thank you for sharing your journeys to publication with such honesty and all of us demystify that process a bit and feels hopeful to me in some way. So you covered so much already, and I think maybe we'll just be in conversation a little bit before we into the questions. But I wonder, in hearing about and naming some of those barriers from the publishing industry itself, and also those kind of internal processes that you also acknowledge in the process of having to start off could you just each maybe speak a little bit to some practices or strategies for those moments where you feel rejection or despair? How do you maybe like fill the waiting time? What are some practices for like productive distraction maybe from that? How do you combat those voices when you hear them? And maybe even how to trick yourself back to getting into the writing process is often that. If you want to just speak to a few practical things.
Yeah, I wrote a couple things down that are like feel very one of them for me was definitely like I think like not writing can be just important as writing. For me, I just can't keep like pushing on something if it's not helping there. Or if I'm just being told no a lot, I need to have something else to pour my energy into. I think the pandemic was actually good for this because it was like, yeah, I had a lot of time to fill, didn't have a kid yet, so I had a lot of time to fill. I learned to play piano as just one example. Yeah, still learning, kind of stopped, but it took some time to like have this other thing that felt creative and also kind of and had nothing to do right and to be a student again of something. More recently, I've actually had swim lessons, which feels like a similar thing of like meditative and it's nothing to do with writing. I feel like getting more than swimming. I could literally drown. I really can't be distracted. I have to be present in the moment. Having those things outside of my computer at my desk and my work is really helpful. Yeah, I work also in tech, so it's not staring at the computer all day just to then choose to stare at the computer. Having things that do like that just get me present in the moment. More on the writing side, a couple things that I came across. All those times that I talked about being told no, but they said some nice things. Those are different to me than the no's that are just form rejections. And I mark them differently, and I keep for this book, but before this book, for all of the fiction that short fiction that I've submitted to magazines, have a long spreadsheet of places I've submitted to, when I hear back, and keep track that like just how I'm rated, which is very interesting data, but then also what they said. rejections don't get color coded, but warm rejections are purple. And acceptances are green. And it's nice now, it goes back to and it's this massive blue sheet that I can scroll through, and there's a lot of white space, but there are some purples. Just having that reminder along with that. So folder folder in my inbox. So those times when your mom's best friend does reach out and say something nice. Times that I've just heard from a reader, or the couple times that I've heard from like readers I don't know who read the book and felt compelled to get about the book, like that's straight to the top of my folder folder. There's a lot of bad reviews on Goodreads, and a lot of people just don't care. And when I meet them, it's external validation, but sometimes that's important and necessary. Yeah, on a more personal level, also big fan of therapy. And I really like those questions that you shared. Why do I write? Advice that I got after the book was sold, kind of similar, was to think about what does success look like. Because I've gotten very familiar with that, but so much of a book is also outside of the writer's control. It's not within my realm of control whether or not things that did feel within my realm of control just like really feel like to me success. And it was helpful to have that for that. It's easy to think about it. Like them too, but to just have some sources of truth. Why do I write? What is
Yeah, similarly, getting out of my head and into my body. So like now it's an intentional, like it's part of my day to day, but I think when I oh no, I have to like actually put this in. Being out in nature as much as possible. And for me in particular, so like I intentionally went to school to be a teacher, and I like intentionally have 3 kids because I love young people, and I feel empty when I'm not around young people. So like being around young people was huge. So it's like, especially if I'm like hitting a writer's block, or I'm like feel too tired and I'm just like don't have the energy to like process creatively in that way, just like turning that off and just being with young people and like teaching, like helping young people with their writing. It's like I'm so focused on them and their process. Suddenly I'm getting like seeds of ideas for myself, but I wasn't intending to like be part of the whole thing. So yeah, those are the main things that I identified as things that really helped me. Having those like creative practices that I feel are connected to writing, but not directly writing. So like singing, dancing, painting, like really not an expert in any of those things, but it feels really good and it feels like it's feeding my writing. So all those kind of like interdisciplinary kind of things. Also, I'm just very curious like about the world and how it works. So it's like I will come across a topic like black holes or like some physics thing, and I will just like binge watch thing, like or research like what's this like YouTube video on this thing, and then I like it will and again it's not intentional, like now it is because I'm like practiced in it, but I'm like, oh, like this actually might mean this thing for my writing, or this character I'm thinking about, or this like theme that I want to hit, and it's like so fun and exciting to just like be in the world of like science and like just like learning that. Like I'm super basic level, but they have so many like cool things now. It's like quantum physics for dummies, which is still really hard to interpret, but like, hey, that's cool, So yeah, just kind of like the writing adjacent things are super helpful. And sometimes literally just like being away from screens, words, anything, and just like having friends over and just like, like just being in community. And like I've noticed that I get into my patterns too of like I binge read everything, like I have to read everything, and I love multiple genres. And then when sometimes I'm just like, I can't. Like I'm sure it's interesting, but those books will just sit in that pile. I can't absorb anything right now. So it's just like kind of reading and having that like inner sort of like intelligence of like when to take in and when not to. So yeah, it's all kind of a work in progress.
I'd say so for me, like when I was in New York and I first started to get into the tech world, a lot of the stuff I did was in the social media space. But in 2020, January actually of that year, I decided to like delete all of my social media accounts. On Facebook, I actually like deleted the full account. On Twitter, I had to leave it because people can actually take your account if you are inactive. But I went through and I deleted every single tweet and I disconnected from everyone and I had that locked down. And I still like went back every 3 months, so I didn't like have it taken away. So I think being off of social media was one of the best things to happen. It was weird because on one hand, I sold out my book because of social media. Like I was able to get into readings and AWP panels because of Facebook groups and Twitter, and I actually started to write and do interviews for Electric Lit because of a conversation on Twitter. But it's like I just realized a lot of it, especially as I like connected with more poets, it was just all just like industry stuff. So like, oh, this person is published and like this person won an award and there's like the 30 under 30 and then there's this. And I just realized like a lot of that just wasn't really necessary for me to see that all the time. Because even if I have the intention of not dwelling on it, it kind of is the thing that is in the forefront. So in Twitter, you can't have an in-depth conversation about a poem, but you can make like 50 tweets about the poem being published and how great you feel about it and all of that. So I kind of felt like I wanted to attend to the actual work and to my relationships with people that were real because it's a weird thing to actually like be friends with people and then see how they tweet on Twitter and you're just like, actually this is way different and like what am I like who am I seeing on Twitter and how are they really and like what is the information? So I think for me, quitting social media was a huge step in my life, but I'm glad that I did it. And I think it was hard during COVID, but in other ways, it really just helped me have a clarity. It's like to reinforce the idea, like I really am not here to get on a list of 35, under 35, or 40, under 40. Like I'm here to like try this new genre, or I'm here to read this new stuff, or I'm here to like have these new thoughts about a topic that is kind of like locked down. So that's one. Two is just community. I think we've said it in different ways, like community inside of poetry, but also outside, like trying to just have friends who do poetry and have a lot of great poetry friends too. I think that's super important. And then yeah, like just the idea, I love your comments about teaching because I feel like I really miss teaching middle schoolers how to write because I feel like middle school is such a cool age intellectually and also a very dangerous age. And it just honestly creates this really cool writing space. And sometimes when I'm down, I'm just like, if I were my teacher and if I was a sixth grader, what would I say? So it's like, if I don't get published or if that poem doesn't get in somewhere, or like this piece it wasn't well received, treating myself like a student and talking to myself like a teacher has gotten me out of a lot of stuff. Um, yeah, and I think that's basically it. Just really trying to be kind to myself and realize that it's a really tricky situation. But like, what are my actual values and what am I trying to do with this? Like, what is the actual goal?
Along the lines of like doing something else is having something else writing wise. Like at some point in this book was like not going, it didn't seem like it would ever see light of day. Especially for those waiting periods, it's nice to be like, well, I can't work on this because I'm waiting to hear back from somebody else. And that's other things. Not all my expert in the basket anyway. And okay, if this doesn't work out, I'll something else.
Thank you. Those were wonderful and very helpful and encouraging. I do want to open to questions from folks here. I think how we'll do that is just for voice your question and I'll read it, I'll repeat it into the mic just for the sake of recording and folks coming after. So, yeah.
Did any of you consider self-publishing for students?
Great question. So the question was, did anyone in those waiting periods consider self-publishing versus traditional publishing?
Absolutely, because my partner is like a printmaker and a bookmaker, and the chapbook Spells for Black Wizards was really a cool, fun book. And it wasn't self-published, but it was very much a super small press, but like a micro press. And actually, I had a lot of conversations with my partner, like, why don't we just staple this together and like give it a go, almost like, because we're into zines, we're into really like stuff like that. That's kind of where we're always thinking. And honestly, for me, it came down to, in terms of the actual poems, a lot of those are on the internet already. Like, I kind of, if it was going to be a book, I kind of needed technical support beyond me and my partner, because it's different making an artist book than a book like this. Like, I wanted certain things to be printed a certain way. And that really calls for a budget that, especially at that time, I didn't have. So for me, I was like, how can I get a press to basically have the resources to print this the right way and to give it the right look and feel? Because if I tried to do that on my own, it would have been like thousands and thousands of dollars. But for sure, like, I think self-publishing is actually awesome. And I think it's kind of not, it's like, if you self-publish, you're not allowed to submit to a lot of awards. And I think that that's messed up. Like, I really don't understand this weird, like, oh, like, you're not published until you're published by a publisher. But technology means we don't really need that divide. And that's like another example of this box where you have to be inside the box to get the resources to like do the things. And I really question all of that still.
And I feel like that's hopefully changing all the time. With more and more people self-publishing, it's just like where I might have considered it eventually, but I think maybe in other projects or like fiction things, but I think it like didn't come to that point for me to consider it, just because this is like, there's so few Palestinian American memoirs, and there's like none that's like multi-generational. And I was like, if I'm gonna be sort of like the spokesperson for this situation, and like my book literally came out like 2 weeks before October 7th. So it's like definitely divinely guided, I'm here to tell you. It just felt as I was working on it that it's so much bigger than me, and I wanted it to get as much like of an audience and resources as I possibly could, just because it was so much bigger.
Yeah, I also feel like their self-publishing is really great path for the right writer, and I just didn't feel like that was there. One of the reasons is because I feel like when you're talking about singing and painting and dancing, like I'm really only good at one thing. I'm not being good at it, but it's the only thing that I do creatively, and it's great. And to put out a book and to self-publish a book takes so many other types of skills that I feel like when it came to the cover, I was like, I have no vision of how to visually represent this book. It was about designing and certainly marketing and publicity. Like I loved learning about that through the process of publishing this book, but I think to self-publish it, I would have had to learn things and be good at things that I'm just not good at. One of them also being social media. I'm tremendously envious of your disconnecting and know that I have like such a toxic relationship. I was gonna say love hate, but like no, it's toxic. But I think I would have to even fall more on the emotional. Like it's just so hard to know how to be a person on social media. And for me, promoting a book in the world, and I think to self-publish it, like you have to really get on that stuff in a way that like, my imposter syndrome is very real for writing, but even like bigger and I think more legitimate outside of writing. But there are definitely people who can do that. There's a podcast when actually you're talking about the business side of things and how nobody in the paper ever wants to talk about it. Nobody even in the publisher book really wants to talk about it. And there's a podcast I found called Publishing Radio, which is like they interview a lot of people who did self-publish and then also went the traditional publishing route for all different kinds of people in the publishing landscape and sort of like unveil all the secrets. It's really helpful.
Now that you say that, like, I just feel like there's so much expertise it takes to publish a book, and we can guess something. I was like, okay, so there's gonna be a designer that's working in InDesign, there's gonna be like a visual designer, but all of these books really represent us as writers, but also there's like a team of people who are all getting paid and they're experts in their field, and typically they're underpaid for all the work that they do to contribute to these books. So I'm thinking, like Alice James put a whole team around the book. The whole team read the book a bajillion times. There's a copy editor that they brought in. They brought in Tiani Kennedy to do the design. When I said I want Florian Demosthenes, this incredible artist, to like do the cover, they were like, sounds great, we'll try. And I honestly, even on the publicity side, that's also why I decided to go with a publisher, because I knew I did not want to be on social media that much. And I did have to hop back onto Twitter, but honestly, it was like 10 tweets. Whereas I knew that if I did it by myself, that would have to be my life again. And so they kind of took care of so many things. And when I was working with the press that didn't have the resources, it kind of made things abundantly clear, like down to paper quality. Like paper quality matters. And I've actually been I'll walk around and actually like touch books and pick them up and sell them, because there are some great presses who don't put a lot of money into how they print, and that totally matters, because I have books on my shelf that are falling apart because of how they're glued, and I was like, if I'm gonna put this much time and effort into this book, I really want to make sure that it's a book that literally can be an art object that will stand up and be on acid-free paper and all that stuff.
So I was intrigued by all of you in various ways. Maybe not Nada, the other two of you. The moments when you actually had a yes from somebody and you went, ugh. I know he wants to marry me, but this isn't really going to work for me. And that takes a level of self-knowledge and of trusting that this isn't the only yes you're ever going to get. And, I get so much into that scarcity thing. If I could just get one person to say yes. So how do you find that place of your being able to say no to an agent, an editor, feedback? I won't go through the whole story, but my first book, the feminist press went through bloodlettings annually. And every time I got a new editor assigned to my book that had a completely different conception of the book, and I had to rewrite the book 5 times. And I was 20, I didn't have the whatever it is to say, no, that's really not going to work for me, and walk away. So how do you find that? And it was good. The book, I love the book now. It all worked out. But how do you find that ability to turn away a yes?
Thank you for that question. So the question was, first of all, an acknowledgement of the self-knowledge and strength it takes to get a yes, but to recognize that it's not the yes for you. And so the question is, how do you cultivate that kind of confidence and self-knowledge?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and I don't really feel like it's something I'm aware of that, because I just feel like there's both a scarcity mentality and just so much gatekeeping that not to take, it's tempting to take the yes just to get a foot in the door. I sometimes think that second guess, do I really want this acceptance? It also comes from a place of self-doubt of that I forget whose quote it is, the I don't want to belong to any club as a member.
Yes,
And I'm like,
yeah,
you want this? There's something wrong with it. It's bad.
that's a Groucho Marx.
Yes, that's gotcha. But yeah, I think in my case, the reasons, the few times I did it, and I think it's so important to have that clarity of vision and to know when the yes forgetting is important. But I think in my case, it was more that my clarity of vision with this book was that I needed it. Because I'd never been on it before, and I wrote short stories, and I still, for the longest time, if there is something that it still needs to hold together as a novel, so that they can put a novel on the cover, as they do for whatever reason, and that I don't have to just say that it's linked stories, because at that point, the one thing I did really feel strongly about was that it wasn't. And when I had that one agent, I love it, I want to represent it. He's like, I know that it still needs something, and I need somebody who's going to come to this work and partner with me and help me see it from like outside of myself and help me get like the next stage of making it closer to it. That's all we can do now. Get it one step closer. I think the other answer to the self-publishing question is just I need it other people. I need them to be the right people, and it's hard to remind myself that there is something in that. Yeah, it's you don't get a lot of chances to say no.
So I'm playing a lot of video games right now, and actually, video games I think are great for writers because the stories have gotten so good. And if you think about a video game, I could do anything in these worlds, and they all have these incredible stories that I think about at night. And I'm playing a game called Baldur's Gate, which is related to Dungeons and Dragons. And there's a character of Raphael, and he's constantly coming to me whenever I'm in trouble and saying, "Well, we can make a deal." And I talk to my partner a lot because I just realized, like, even in my book, there's this like Mephistopheles figure and the concept of a deal with the devil and how that story just keeps coming back over and over and over again. And I notice it everywhere now. So it's just like I need to have the clarity of purpose and the presence of mind to know when I'm making a deal with the devil. But usually it's not that bad. Usually it's like I'll win a little bit and they'll get what they want, but it's just not quite the right situation. And I think clarity of purpose is incredibly important. I think a lot of it is privilege too sometimes, but there have been a lot of times where I technically really didn't have the privilege to say no, and it was a huge risk. And I think refusal, just in terms of Black history, is incredibly important. Like the people who are just like, no, like screw this, I'm not doing that. And I think my mom raised me to be that way and to say no a lot. Like she raised a very defiant person. And so when I felt like there was a situation, whether it was paying NYU like $80,000 for a MFA for XYZ, but actually they would benefit from my name and like being associated with me if I won a big award, or like just saying no to certain jobs, like it was super risky, but I'll always call my mom and she'll just be like, well, what's your purpose? Like, why are you here? And like, what are you doing? And she was just like, like die trying, like don't just give up. And another quote that I actually come back to a lot is there's this part in Julius Caesar where Julius Caesar is like, cowards die like a million times, but the brave die once. And I think my mom actually introduced me to that. And it's something that I think about all the time. Not that my life is that dramatic. Like most of the time I'm sitting in my living room on a computer working, but it's like, sometimes I'm just like, it's like, yeah, I could lose money. And sometimes in my life, yeah, like I could lose my employment, which is like a death sentence here in the US. But it's like, what is it that I'm actually being asked to do? And what's the point of writing if I don't make a book that I really want to make? Like, what's the point then? Like, why did I spend all this time? So a lot of it is just a lot of soul searching and just rolling the dice and seeing if it's going to hurt me a lot. And sometimes it has. But luckily with this book, I was able to get more than one yes down the road. But I'm glad that I said no, because that book would have not been good. It would have just been like a total nightmare.
Thank you. Great questions so far.
First of all, thank you all for being here. It's been really super helpful, and congratulations to all of you. Like, these are two, so proud of your accomplishments. It's really amazing that you've gone through this journey. But yeah, my question is, I took a class at Grub Street in Boston a while back. They're awesome, and the class was about how to write query letters for agents, with the premise being like you could have like the most like amazing book in the world, but if you can't like get someone to like feel that way, like from your cold email or letter or whatever, then it's going to be hard to get those guesses that you're looking for. So just curious, like what your thoughts are about like how to write that cold email or how to send that query letter. Like how do you craft that to really sell your book to the agent to begin with?
So the question was how to craft a good query letter or that cold email to sell what the two things.
I think my publishing process and just the writing process you don't do it alone. Make sure you have a team. So like now I kind of gotten myself used to that process of being like, okay, I'm not, yes, it's my stuff, but I'm not in it alone. I'm like more willing and open to have other people look at it and figure this out.
I have so many feelings about query letters, because I just feel like it's so unfair. That like a person would be expected to write a whole book and all of the things that go into it. And then also write this other thing about the book. It just feels like one person. If you want to read the book, read the book. I don't know what to tell you, but all of that said, I actually found a lot of benefit to the query letter process. Like I said, I did 2 rounds of agent submissions, so I had a chance to kind of workshop my own query letter. What ends up happening is people either never respond at all, respond and say no, respond and say send me some more, or I'm interested in getting presented to you. Or do that and then maybe say yes afterwards. And you can learn a lot from those different responses, right? Just like it doesn't tell you anything about the book because they haven't read the book yet, but it tells you what they're interested in. If you've captured their attention and how and what and where. It turned out that the second time that I queried and actually got agent offers, the language that I used to describe the book ended up being language that I really like that didn't end up that way. And then it came in very handy because I had a meeting with the publicity team at Team House, and they sent me an author questionnaire that asked me all these questions about, well, how would you market? And now I had actually done some thinking about that. And some of it is on the jacket copy, which is like, it's kind of funny that my agent query letter ended up on the jacket copy of my book. Makes me a little bit happier about the whole thing, because I did feel deeply resentful of like, I don't know, just read the book. But yeah, there's like a lot of, I think sending it to friends, to other writers, community is really helpful. Maybe haven't read the book, so they're like, where would this make me want to read it, and there's like a lot of resources out there that like, are kind of specifically about this one small piece of it all. Courtney Mom and that's like another one of these like helpful. She's actually going to tell you about the business side of things. So they're so like formulaic and weird, but
So it's like, it's kind of like this weird unfair process, right? That we have no control over, especially if we don't have proximity to power. So a lot of people who get published will never write a query letter just because they happen to get that dice roll where it's like, oh, like they're surrounded by people who can maybe help them get that spot. And that's honestly the best bet is like the like dream is like, oh, you have this poem published in a thing, and then this agent calls you and it's like, wow, like this is really cool. Let me represent you. You know, like that's the poetry dream now. And I think for me, because I did have a great community behind me, and I honestly I was a finalist in the National Poetry Series. So as soon as that happened, I was just like, you know, dear blank, my book was just a finalist in the National Poetry Series. Here's the title. If you would like to read it, please let me know. And that email got like a 90% yes rate. And I think it was because of the National Poetry Series. So it's like finding ways to warm up that cold email, whether it's a great publication or like maybe seeing if you know someone who could vouch for you and can maybe have a chat with the person. It's like I think there are all these things that people don't talk about related to how that works. But it's like, yeah, it's like it was way easier for me when I could say, oh, I was a finalist for this huge award. Like, please read the book, and then maybe you too might like it, you know. But I think if I had written that same thing before I had that, I don't think it would have even gotten read because I think I even put it in the subject line or something. Like I was pretty bold. I was just like, F it. I think I like did it late on a Friday night. I think I had a drink. I was like, I don't care. Like, what's the worst thing that happened? I was like, you know, like National Poetry Series finalist query. Boom, let's go. I found their email addresses. So you just honestly have to claw your way in. And there's going to be a lot of yeses and nos. And it's just a lot of it is luck. So if you can just find things that might generate some of that for you, or maybe you it's almost like you got the luck of getting an open reader and then your letter helped you generate something from that luck. So it's like there's a lot of luck, but I think, yeah, like not getting too stuck on that because that's always true. But then finding things where if you do get the luck, you'll actually be able to take that luck and go further. Because a lot of people I know have actually gotten incredible luck, but they weren't in the place to like actually see it to that next step.
I feel like you absolutely need to put that aside.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, totally. And anything like that, like, it doesn't feel right, but it's what you.
Oh, it feels terrible.
The other thing I want to say about queries is I kind of want the book that I'm working on now. It's a collection of stories, and, truly a collection of stories with 10. But somewhere along the way, I was like, I'm going to write a query letter for this book, even though I didn't have plans to be my agent. I also kind of want to think like, how would I package this if I were going to try to get somebody to care about it again? Just because I now understand enough to know that you need to know more than just what is your book, but how will it find its readers? At least a little bit. I still feel like super well writing a query letter for the book I'm writing now was really, really helpful. What is this project and what does this? What makes these stories belong in a book together? What is this book concerned with? What other stories could I write to fill it in? All those kinds of questions. So, and then also like, what books does this belong on the shelf next to? Like those kinds of questions, like help me keep my energy and excitement about what I'm doing. So query letters are incredible.
Thank you. And I think we just have time for just to do two questions. So these will be our last.
Going off of the query letters, some of you it seems were published ahead of time. So how much did you, especially when you said you put that in your subject line, did you also include in yours like who have been published on places and stuff like that to help, and how much does that matter?
The question is, how much does having publications and read about matter, and did you include that in your query or
Yeah, so what I did is I had like the subject line, like 2 or 3 lines, and then I put my bio at the bottom. And back then, my bio was like more like a traditional one, like, you know, Candace Williams published these places, does these things. And I think that definitely helps because I think just people want a reference or like a social reference, like, oh, I'm on the right track with what I'm reading. And I do think in my case, it definitely helped at every step of the way to have publications, especially in the world of poetry, but I think it might be different than fiction and memoir and stuff like that.
Yeah, I was always like listing every little literary magazine thing I was like, but now that this book is out, I don't feel the pressure to do that as much. I think that's sort of like trained to do in your brain to be like, look at all the little things, which is great. And it's like, I think for me it was more of like a personal practice of valuing my work as opposed to, I don't know if it actually in the external world is like what it made a big difference from my particular thing. I know people who like, yeah, it just really depends because I can reference like either.
Yeah, I think it depends. The question of like how much does it matter? I think it's like how much does it matter for what are you trying to do or where are you trying to go with your work? I feel like it can matter kind of a depressing amount, but it doesn't have to. The first time I queried, I like I mean, there's like such a formula. First paragraph is about the top titles, biographical information. Also helps if you know somebody who the agent represents, which is just like there's just so much gatekeeping, and you can see how that like prevents inclusivity and just promotes like everything that's wrong with emotional. So I don't think it has to be that way, but it can certainly be that way. First time I heard it was a lot of reaching out to other writers who I knew who were friends of mine whose work I do really like, resonate with and see some like energy between and which is such a privileged position. Yeah, ended up not mattering anyway. The organization said yes, but I think they probably opened the about us because of that. It's depressing reality.
So I just wanted to say that I write nonfiction, I write history. And that's a different world. And in nonfiction, you don't write the book and then query an agent, you write a book proposal. And what I wanted to suggest is, I find I'm working on 2 now. The process of writing a full book proposal is really helpful at getting you to think the way publishers think and to see what they care about. And there's a woman, I think the website is Manuscript Works. It's Laura Portwood Stacy or something like that. And she has a lot of freebies on her website about like worksheets for book proposals. And I really think that might be helpful for the kind of thing you're talking about, even if that's not the route that's going to work for your genre.
Thank you, Betsy. Yeah, just for the recording, that was a suggestion. In the world of nonfiction publishing, you often are required to write a book proposal theory, and this could be a helpful process. I do want to hold space if our authors are okay for one more question, just in case. Shoot, I something, but that's okay. I saw it. We'll go ahead. It's a lovely question about if you've ever considered being on the other side as a publisher of books or putting out books, and how you would change to kind of overcome those barriers that you.
I definitely considered it. I'm open to it. There's obviously a lot to learn, but even from the folks who've been doing it a long time, what I hear from them is they have to do a lot like, while doing. So like that gives me faith that I don't have to like be an expert before I like. And I would like I love that idea of like being in community with being like really intentional. So like Row House Publishing, like I love them because they're super intentional about like everything that they do, from the way they like construct their book contracts to the way that like they help promote. It's just like their soup to nuts kind of like mentality, and like being really intentional about like promoting marginalized voices. It would have to be like that I'm on that kind of team if I was ever to get at it from that end. And I would like to add just because I've always been like an educator, it's like the people to think backwards and like how like to help folks, right, from when they're young, if they know that that's their path, right? Because like the way it currently is, if you're like a really passionate writer as like a teenager, it's just like super limited to like you have to really come from a background where your family or whatever is like connected and can kind of put you in the right place at the right time. It's like a weird luck thing, but like how to like democratize that process, because creativity is for everyone, and like just thinking bigger in terms of not just the whole, okay, like the promoting and the publishing and the editing, but like even wider, like how to grab people when they're starting out, like giving them those options and exploring those routes. Because it's like, yeah, like the people who I will never forget this, being in like my last semester at Lesley and having it be this like elective session to be in workshop that you could do during your lunchtime, because like the school didn't really want you to like, like do it on like during your regular time, and having like being in like it was like a panel like this, and literally every single person was white, and every single person was like under 30 years old, and it was like kind of interesting to be like, and they were so knowledgeable, and it was very interesting. But I'm like, how were you on that side? Like, how did you know that? You know what I mean? Like, it's just like, why is this invisible? What, like, this information needs to be available to anyone who wants it. So anyway, I can go off on that. So like, I am interested in it if it comes, to be, but also widening it.
Yeah, that's such a nice question. I think for me, I'm not super interested in like the book side of it, and like book publishing and acquisitions, just because I like what you said, Candace, about having like some separation between writing life and work life. I think if writing became the thing I did for money and needed to make money, then I would be the one facing some of those like horrible capitalist decisions of like, well, what do I think is going to sell? But where I think about it more so is like, how can I be an agent of change in the ways that I want to? So like one thing I loved working with in-house for 1,001 reasons. One of them being that I do think that they are holding space for like different ways of getting the world. And they do a submission period that's for unagented submissions, which like that eliminates one gatekeeper off the bat. A bunch of workshops where they have scholarships for all different kinds of identities and which I love to see. And they are really trying to, I think, doing a lot of good work. Barriers, try to like amplify that in whatever ways I can. The times I don't feel horrible about social media, or where I'm like re-sharing their opportunities that they're getting. And then also just thinking about like, where do I choose to like the community that I'm fostering with other writers, and the ways in which that they're supporting each other and I'm supporting them. Use a little bit that I now know to try to like spread that awareness and help educate folks. And just the gatekeeping and secrecy is just so weird. Create so many issues. There's a small media. They're out of New York. One of their editors lives here in Providence. And they're a cooperatively owned shop and publisher. And they publish this anthology that I was part of. That's like the whole. It feels very like democratizing process. So trying to like take some faith in all of that.
So I was a poetry reader for like 3 months in 2018 or 2017. And I just had to stop because it was so hard to do all the work justice. Like I would look at my submittable emails and it's like, oh, I have to read like 200 packets of poems in X amount of time. And then being on that side of it, I was just like, actually, this is very hard. I don't know like how people are able to read and then choose between a body of work when all poems are so different, all people are so different, and like I really don't think like if you write, you're a writer to me. It's like I don't really like to put that gate up, and so I left that opportunity, and then down the road, I had the opportunity to edit Bettering American Poetry Volume 3. And I had a similar issue. Like, honestly, if I had it my way, I would have just created an anthology with all of the submissions and then just called it a day. And actually, I talked to my partner. I was like, if I won the lottery, I would totally just make a press that was based on like dice rolls for random acquisitions. I would just say, you send me a book, and as long as it's not problematic, like you have a chance at getting published. Because that's the thing I'm having a hard time reckoning. It's like who decides what quality is, who decides the resourcing, and like I think some of the best poets I know and some of the best writers I know will never have a book published. And so it's kind of a privilege and kind of just luck that I'm here like talking about this stuff. And yeah, so I think for me, I would love to just win the lottery, and I would totally give money to like Natalie Albert, and she's one of the best readers of anything. I've like she published my chapbook, and she's incredible. I wish that I could just give her a full big press. Same thing with Morgan Parker. Same thing with Wendy Shu. Like there are just people I've met who are really good at this stuff, and they've tried to make it a career or start a press, but it's just so hard to keep it moving. So I think there are people who are really into the business side of things. And I'm really always curious about Toni Morrison because she was on that side before she became a writer. And I'm always curious, like, how was she able to make that transition and what did it bring to her writing? And also, how did it make it maybe harder in some ways? Are you okay with one question? Okay, thank you. Go ahead.
You kind of touched on this, but what was the collaboration process with the publisher and making your covers, and how much say did you have or want to have?
What was the collaboration process for working with your publishers on the cover, and how much say did you have in that?
This is super fun for me to talk about because it's a very small press, but they do have a process of getting you like an artist with like options, and they have a graphic designer. So before it was like around the time I like signed the contract, I was like, just because I was like, happened to be friends with the book acquisitions editor, to be like, so I have this weird idea. It's okay if it's a no, but my best friend's an illustrator, and I feel it's like super important to have someone I know illustrate my first book in particular. And because it has all this like personal information, it's like multi-generational, this is a person who like she knows me better than anyone in the world. She like understands also like my aesthetic. She's like made my like wedding invitations for me, like all this stuff. So like I know, I haven't asked her yet, but like before I ask her, is it okay? And she's like, I don't know, let me ask. So it was just like really weird and random. She asked, it was a yes, and I was like, oh my God. So then I like presented it to my friend who like is an amazing artist, but like also doesn't do it full time and like doesn't really want to be doing it full time. She just like does it for fun, and I didn't want to like make it sound like you have to do it, but I was like, look, that like she read the book, she was my first reader, she understood how much it meant for me to like get it out, and I was like, I really don't want anyone except you. Is this okay? Like pretty please. So she agreed. But so the process, like along the way, she had her and she illustrated it by hand. Like it wasn't like it was it was like she used a digital platform but it wasn't like a program or whatever. Like I don't know much about the things. But so what they did change it a tad, and they moved things around. So and she did do some background research because designing book covers, but like you have to know certain dimensions, right? Like math and all that. So she did do some background research, but I did end up going through their digital person because it was literally just like the layout. Because what we didn't think about was like, yes, there's a front cover, but there's the back, and there's the inside jacket, and there's like the title page, but she also illustrated, so I have these section breaks in between, there's like 3 sections, and she illustrated amazing little maps for me that like we went back and forth, and she was just like fun to work with, is my best friend. So it was just like a beautiful process, and I'm like already like the little bit of feedback I'm getting already. That's like one of the first things that they say is about the cover art, but also like the section art. They're just like, oh my god. I'm like, yes, I would get all of those images tattooed on me. They're so good. But yeah, it was unusual. It was an unusual ask because they're a small press. It was almost like I took something off their plate for them, so they were like okay with it. And they did cut her like a small check, and it was just like a few emails back and forth with the graphic person to like, realign and like change it slightly. But yeah, it was just like, if I'm blazing a trail, I may as well just like blaze the whole trail, like cover and everything. So why not? Yeah.
Thank you. So I really don't consider myself to be a visual artist, and my partner is, which is great. So it's great to have that as a point of feedback. But they basically said, you're going to choose a cover artist. We have a small budget to secure the rights to the work. It's not huge, and then we will have a graphic designer work on the book and kind of give you the options and stuff like that. So I kind of I'm really big into visual art, and I was just like, I almost thought my book would not have a person on the cover. There's a big trend of like, doing text, which I just love. I love like text as like art. And then also I was looking at the work of like Alma Thomas, who does very like non-figurative pieces that have a lot of cool patterns. And the reason why I didn't want a person is I was like, well, the protagonist of this book has a learned body. They're queer, they're non-binary. I'm not really seeing that in the art world. I'm not seeing that in pieces of art. So actually, I kind of just went back into my like journals of going to museums, and I actually just was on Artsy very heavily, like looking almost at every single Black artist that I could find. And then I came across Florine Demosthenes' work, and I remember I just gasped. Like I went to her website, and I was like, "This is the first time I've seen me like this." And then I sent it to my mom, and she was like, "Whoa, is that you?" And I was like, "I think so." And the way it worked was that Alice James contacted her, and she was like really cool. She said yes, and she's been so great to work with. And then Tiani Kennedy was the designer of the book, and she kind of took the image, and you definitely have to work with it because it's never going to be in the right dimensions. And so this is actually a huge piece where if I win the lottery, I want to buy it someday. I think it's like $20,000 for me to buy. But they kind of had to take this piece that's huge and that has a lot of texture and that has a certain dimension, and how do you shrink it to the book, and like what flourishes go around it, and like even like what would the text be. Like I never thought I would have this font on my book, but I was like, actually it looks like handwriting. I like the framing. And then if you flip through the book, there are a lot of visual flourishes that are actually related to the Memphis sanitation strike. Like my publisher was like, "Oh, I am the most dangerous thing. I am a man," which like those posters, and I never even thought of that. And so it was really cool to have this generative process where people were reading the book and being like, "Did you ever think about those posters?" And I was like, "Yes, but not for this. This is awesome." And it was just a cool thing to be able to do.
My process was extremely different from, yours were different from each other, but mine's also different. So I think it can go any number of ways. But for me, it was one of those periods of waiting where I forget at what stage probably copy edits were. I think it was after fact checking. Just waiting around wondering what was going on with my book. Although my editor kept watching me. And then one day just got an email where she was like, "So thrilled to show you the cover art. We have two potential." She was like, "We have two different approaches to share, but they were the same." it was this beautiful painting by an artist named Howe in this kind of dimensions, and then a kind of more zoomed out one with a little bit more negative space. So it was the same, but and it was a lot of learning for me. It was like, what kind of feedback can I give at stage and in the process, and there it was like, when I looked at it, it took my breath away. I was like, this is pretty sure about that. But I did have some feedback, and it did feel like they had already designed a whole cover, and I found out later they'd actually gotten it approved all the way to their chain and from their distributor, and so they were kind of just like, checkbox please. But I did not like the font. I felt very strongly about the font, and so my one kind of like back and forth with them was about the font. So the art is by Ian Cow. It was a painting that existed and it was designed by designer Stidle, who very intentionally chose the font, but the font that she chose was from museums. It's like you would see in like the explanatory text by the curator about painting, and it just didn't feel like a title font, like it felt like the body of the text. And I just didn't think it really like was meshing well with the image in a way, like way. And so she did, and they had that feedback also from some of their internal artists reviews, so they were able to push on that. And she sent 3 or 4 different versions. One of them was this like fading in the background version, and I fell with it. The other cool thing was sort of like a reverse thing happened where the image was not one that like appeared in the text of the book itself, the image on the cover, but I knew that there was a place where it could, because there's in the book there's like this sort of like advertising around this new procedure to enter painting, and it has this like these like celebrity portraits on it, and I was like, all I have to do is add some clouds to those portraits, and there's the cover image of my book. So this kind of like reverse thing happened where I like wrote the cover. Yeah.
All right, thank you so much for those thoughtful questions and for being such an attentive audience. Let's thank our panelists one more time for their other books up here that we've been talking about. Feel free to browse them. Those are our copies and looking here in our local author library. And go to a local bookstore and buy their books too if you'd like to support some talent. Thank you again for being with us today. If you want to continue this exploration of cultivating care and creative practice, we'll have more programs for you coming up in 2024. Let us know how we can support your work at LitArts RI. We'll be sending a brief survey over email that helps us report to our funders, again, gratitude to Province for Culture and Tourism and the Dexter donation for making this event possible. Thank you again to authors. Please feel free, it's almost 4 o'clock, so feel free to hang out and say hi to folks. Just be respectful of everyone's time. Just coming.
So cool. Thank you for doing this.